So is the middle class being forced to give up their ambitions, and our lives and lifestyles supposed to revolve around the prices of onions and tomatoes and potatoes? That's a big question. Is inflation and high interest, the entire regime of high interest, is that the new normal today? I ask this because the RBI has kept the interest rates unchanged, which means that home loan EMIs are not about to come down yet. India's largest automaker, Maruti, is expected to hike prices by up to 4% come January. And if you want to take a personal loan out for a new iPhone, a new Samsung, a fridge, an AC, you will still have to pay high interest rates. Last year, the government floated the idea of a Tomato Grand Challenge. Today, we learned that there will be yet another meeting to take stock of rising edible oil prices. And these meetings and statements have become a rather seasonal affair. But where are the results? Why are prices so high? Who is failing India's middle class? Let's connect with my colleague Samir Dikshit. He's here to tell us what the government is currently thinking of. Samir.
The rise in the inflation number is not just impacting the common people, but it is also raising concerns for the government, whether it be the essential commodities, even to the prices of tomatoes, onion. It has gone up, and now government is looking to take some serious action so as to keep a check on the prices of the edible oil and other commodities. In the same direction, but we are picking up from our sources that the key ministry is soon going to chair an important meeting with the stakeholders on the issue of the prices of edible oil. So the food ministry will be chairing this meeting, and this meeting will be held with the stakeholders that will include the importers of edible oil, the millers of edible oil, the distributors or the wholesaler. And the big agenda is that what is actually the factors which are leading to the rise in the prices of edible oil, and what all steps could be taken in, what all intervention could be done from the government side so as to keep a check on the price of the edible oil. Not just this, in terms of other commodities as well, whether it be tomato, onion or potato, government is taking steps and is also looking to intervene by more steps to keep a check on the prices of these commodities. In addition to this, even Shivraj Singh Chauhan, who is the agriculture minister, he informed in the upper house of the parliament that the government is fully committed to procure the farm produce from the farmers at the 50% of the cost which is incurred by the farmers to produce that particular crop. So that's the commitment that government has shown in the parliament. But largely, government is indicating that they are equally concerned when it comes to the inflation, and they are ready to take the steps or intervention as and when required.
Yes, but when will these interventions really lead to the kind of results you need to bring high prices down? Where does the buck stop on inflation? Farmers clearly are not happy. They are protesting. Consumers, largely the poor and middle class, they're wondering whether they should buy onions and potatoes or a home or a mobile phone, because until food inflation isn't controlled, interest rates will not climb down. So let's break this down. A panel of guests joining us. VijaySardana is an expert on agri-businesses. He joins us with Mitali Nikore, founder and economist at Nikore Associates. She's going to help us decode the macro implications and government accountability, and to weigh in on how inflation impacts the broader economy, especially the real estate sector. We have on our panel tonight Ghulam Zia, Senior Executive Director at Knight Frank India. Thank you all for joining us this evening on an important subject. VijaySardana, to you first. Is this flawed policy making or supply side inefficiencies? What do you blame for rising food prices? Because no matter whatever interventions have taken place, no matter what the government has tried to do, the prices have remained elevated.
Good evening to all of you and to the viewers first. My only concern is there is no policy whatsoever when it comes to food security in India. Have you ever seen? What you people talk about is Food Security Act. There is no food security policy in this country. Now, problem is you have a population of 144 crore. 3 times food people need every day. You are already importing 70% of your edible oil requirement. With growing population, imports will increase. Now, today we are talking about oil price inflation, edible oil price inflation. This I said on my channel, on my YouTube channel, with a detailed analysis before Maharashtra election. The way central government, Honorable Prime Minister announced that soybean MSP will be 6,000 per quintal, prices will shoot up, and this is what you are finding soon after election. See, you have to appreciate one thing. More you increase the farm prices to please farmers, consumers have to pay the price. Government cannot subsidize because you don't have funds. Most of your budgets are actually committed. Only budget which is at discretionary spending is only 9% of total budget of India. So we have to appreciate that. Second important point, from last 10 years, in all commodities, productivity is stagnant. Every year your population is going by almost 1.5 crore up. It means you need 15 million tons additional food items over and above last year. Are you producing that? Second point. Third, have you ever seen a single data in any of the news channel or newspapers? What is the total demand of tomato, potato, onion, or vegetables in India? What you get is a production data. Whether this production is enough or not a single data to tell what is the total demand. So what I'm trying to say is that, first of all, there is no policy because agriculture is a state subject. Not a single state has a food security plan. So they always look at central government, somehow, somewhere they will manage to feed us. When it comes to inflation, we start blaming the central government. Actually, the problem are the states of India. Agriculture is a state subject. Number two, we don't have research. Our productivity is stagnant. Now, problem is you will see data increasing on papers. Last year we had 109 million ton, then we have 110 million ton, then 115 million ton. This agriculture cultivation happening only in statistics, not on ground.
So you're saying that our output is growing, but it is growing only on paper, that we don't have numbers to tell us exactly what our demand scenario is and whether or not we are producing enough. And that could be one of the reasons. And you're saying that this is a state subject and it needs to be tackled at the state level. Of course, the Vice President of India brought up the issue of the plight of farmers, and the Agriculture Minister, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, he has spoken about it. Just listen to what he has said.
हम 50% लागत का 50% से ज्यादा मिनिमम सपोर्ट प्राइस तय करेंगे और खरीदने का भी काम करेंगे। लिए किसानों की सेवा भगवान की पूजा है और यही मान के उनकी सेवा के काम में निरंतर लगे रहेंगे। एमएसपी पर किसानों को उत्पाद खरीदा है और अब भी पूरा उत्पाद खरीदेंगे। मेरी कोशिश रहेगी संपूर्ण सामर्थ्य और क्षमता झोंक के काम करके अपने किसानों की सेवा कर सके और कृषि के परिदृश्य को और बेहतर बना सके। विकसित भारत का संकल्प लिया है प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने, उसी का एक रोड मैप कृषि में भी हमने बनाया है, उसको पूरा करने में कोई कसर नहीं छोड़ेंगे।
Mithali, you just heard what the Agriculture Minister has said as far as looking after the farmers' needs, about the minimum support price, and all of that has been spoken about. Mr. Sardana is also alluding to that. But the question is, where will this inflation go when middle class expands? Because it is expanding, and of course it will in the coming years. Like Mr. Sardana is saying, there is not enough vegetables for Indians even now. So all these measures that the government is talking about, the MSP, etc., how is this going to address the real issue of higher prices?
Thanks a lot, Vikram, for bringing me into this discussion, and a great pleasure to be joining you today. I think there are two aspects when we are talking about the agricultural economy. The first aspect, which Vijay ji has already spoken about, is around production, right? And production is, there's of course a debate around whether it's sufficient or not, and our inflation rates will reflect that. But then the second aspect is around distribution and logistics, right? So even if you are producing a little bit less than what your ideal consumption amount should be, and even if you are producing, even if you are meeting that through imports, at the end of the day, you have to think about how that is going to be distributed across your consumption centers. And today, India also faces a challenge of that distribution and that logistics supply chain being inefficient in some ways. We have more and more, investment coming into cold storage. We have more and more investment coming into what we call reefer trucks or refrigerated trucks to take this produce from, the rural areas and the farmer communities onto the urban areas where the consumption is growing. But that has probably not kept pace with the kind of demand and the increase in demand that we are seeing. Mainly the demand, which is actually, we are not seeing a massive increase in the quantum of demand, at least per our research. What we are seeing is a massive increase in the quantum of urban demand because of a large amount of migration from rural to urban areas in search of jobs and employment. So at the end of the day, we have to think about this distribution and logistics supply chains, making them more efficient, making them greener, making them less carbon emitters. And that's how we can really think about restarting and reducing inflation. And of course, currently that inflation numbers, as you are already projecting on your screen, the overall inflation is low, but the food inflation is very high, and
That's
that's
the
what
problem
was
area.
reflected.
And it has been
That's what was
elevated for a
reflected.
considerable amount of time. And you're saying that food is
Exactly.
not reaching in the quantity that it needs to where the demand is. And perhaps we will talk about the supply chain interventions. Have we had enough of that to mitigate food inflation better than counting on monetary policy alone? Mitali, the Union Minister Piyush Goyal has criticized targeting food inflation through rate hikes. He's called it a flawed policy. Do you agree that the RBI is focusing on the wrong tool, or is it forced to act in the absence of any decisive fiscal measures?
Vikram, this time I was expecting the RBI to come with a rate cut, because at the end of the day, when we look at the headline inflation number, it's still lower than 6%, which is their range. 3% to 6% is where the RBI is comfortable in terms of their inflation targeting regime. And on the other side, we have seen that the GDP growth in Q2 has slowed a bit. We did see that we are sitting at 5.4%, which, as you were showing on your screen as well, is amongst the lowest in the last 2 years. So therefore, maybe this was the time for the RBI to consider a rate cut. They have gone for a reduction in cash reserve ratio to enhance the liquidity overall, in the lending markets, but they have kept the repo rate unchanged, and that's the rate which affects a lot of small businesses. It affects a lot of small consumers. It affects even larger businesses. So therefore, the space for liquidity, despite reducing cash reserve ratio,
Yes.
is still limited.
Well, the repo rate is what really affects you and me. It really determines how much we are going to pay to be able to take that car on loan or to be able to buy a home that we've dreamt of. And now, of course, the RBI has also revised its GDP growth projection downward. It has been now brought down to 6.6%. It was 7.2%. And it's raised its inflation projection now to 4.8%. So obviously, these elevated prices in our economy can contribute to the kind of growth slowdown that we are currently seeing. Ghulam, how do you see this dual pressure affecting sectors like yours, like real estate, which are heavily dependent on consumer sentiment and access to credit?
Vikram, first of all, thank you for calling me on this show, and I'm an absolute odd man out. You have the economists here, and I'm the one who doesn't understand most of what you're talking about. So I'll try to focus only what I understand, which is real estate. And your question is, first of all, I'm pretty surprised when you say, would you not buy tomatoes and buy a house? Well, I don't think that's what is going to happen. So here it is simple. People are buying houses in hordes. That's something which has actually changed in last 3 to 4 years. Prior to that, after almost about 10 consecutive years of a slowdown, real estate is now looking at a growth. And this last 2 to 3 years of a growth is reflecting in number of transactions going on. And these are record-breaking transactions. Current year in the top 6 to 7 cities, normally we look at top 7 or 8 metros. This year we are going to see almost about 4 to 5 lakh apartment transactions in this calendar year. That's actually almost about 40 to 50% more than what it used to be before COVID numbers. So this is something which is outstanding. But here the concern remains, because most of these numbers of housing sales that we talk about also hide another aspect of it, which is low end of the housing, which is the mass housing, where the numbers are shrinking. So the something which has to be brought to the fore is this. that the transactions happening are only in
But
mid
how
to
many of
upper
these
end the market.
transactions are non-luxury? When you talk about affordable housing, how much of a pickup are you seeing over there?
That's exactly what I was coming to, Vikram. That the mid to lower end of the market, which used to be almost 2/3 pre-COVID, has now shrunk to just about 1/3. And that's a concern, because the upper end of the market, which I would say 4 crore plus kind of apartments, are really taking the lion's share out of this whole thing. So somewhere on the other side, what I was listening to the other economists, that the demand pressure is actually felt on the lower end of it, where the supply is not there. So after 3-4 years, when that market will start shooting up, you will not see any of the produce there, because last 3 years, every developer is focusing on mid to upper end, where you have a low-hanging fruit, you can sell like hotcakes, you have huge profit margins. Nobody is focusing on the mid to lower end of the segment. And that is where the concerns are rising when the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana 2.0 has come across after almost about a year and a half or two of a gap between the two schemes, where the credit the lower interest rates to be offered to the lower end of the market is not yet kicking in. But whenever that comes in, the demand for affordable housing will shoot up and the prices will go up because there's no supply there.
But
So
that's the problem. When do we arrive at that point in time when that affordable factor is going to kick in for housing? And that's the real question that we're asking tonight.
Yeah, just to answer that, but recently we have seen that the gap of the affordable housing segment today is more than 1 crore apartment shortage. And as we are growing, we're talking about the GDP growth, we're talking about 3.5 trillion to go to 5 and 7 and 8 trillion. The housing demand for especially affordable housing is going to shoot up. So our estimates are in next 6 years, by 2030, the affordable housing demand will be shooting up to 3.2 crores. And the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana right now is focusing just giving approximately 1 to 1.25 crore housing in next 4 to 5 years. So there is going to be a huge shortfall between the demand and supply. And that's where the worry is that another year and a half or two, when we shall see the SLCC, the credit link schemes that are coming in to support the lower end of the market will kick in, but the supplies will not be there.
Many would argue, Ghulam, that inflation is a tax on the poor. How much do you think the government inefficiencies versus global factors are to really blame for the current crisis when it comes to higher prices, which takes the shine away from sectors like yours when interest rates remain elevated and out of reach for those aspiring to buy their own homes?
I would once again go back to what just I said a short while back. The submission is that the transactions are happening mid to upper end. And let's understand, in luxury segment, the home loan requirement is very, very low. Home loan requirement is highest, almost about 70 to 75% dependency on home loan in the lower end of the market.
So
And
how much has the demand for home loans really changed in post-pandemic era?
Actually, it had shot up about 6 to 7 months back. It was shooting up, but last 6-7 months it has started coming down. The growth in home loans is actually coming down, and there's a concern somewhere. It is showing that the trends are changing.
Exactly.
If you don't bring the interest rates down, if the interest rates are not cut, it will start impacting even mid to just about mid end of the market also will be impacted.
And that's what we are saying, that the RBI is finding food inflation so high, they are unable to cut rates. Like Mitali was pointing out, she was expecting the RBI to start cutting rates, especially going after the Q2 GDP that we've seen. And that was the worrying factor. VijaySardana, the RBI says food inflation is largely a supply side problem. Have government interventions like price stabilization funds, these import-export restrictions, have they come in? Have they been too little too late just to address the volatility in essential items? You're talking about tomatoes, onions and potatoes.
See, what is important for us to understand that unless you have a food security plan, you don't know which way you are going. What government is doing, it is like, you are catching a fly who is flying here and there. Point here is that once, I always say that, when there is a onion crisis, you start targeting onion. And after 1 month, there is a tomato crisis, you start targeting tomatoes. And then suddenly you realize edible oil is going out of control. And then you realize even price of rice or wheat is also shooting out. And then there is another set of crisis. It is haphazard work. What I'm trying to say is that, first of all, Government of India must do a proper food security plan, not act. There are two different things. Politicians get confused between the two. I'm talking of food security plan. How much tomato we need in this country on a daily basis. It's a seasonal crop.
One takes
Today
that
you are
point, Mr.
having a
Sardana.
surplus.
One takes that point. But just to understand, you mentioned food grains as well. A lot has been said that we have ample supplies of food grain stocks available to us. But we still see price surges over there. So is this about supply chain failing, or is there policy coordination that is lacking?
See, please appreciate, market forces are more powerful than political forces. When you are looking at inflation, this is the reality. What you hear from politicians is an assumption. What we have to look at is two different things. If you have surplus grains, then why you are banning exports? If you have surplus sugar, why you are banning sugar exports? If you have surplus oil seeds, 70% edible oil you are importing. If you have enough pulses, why you are importing pulses to stabilize the prices? So you don't have sugar, you don't have oil, you don't have pulses, you have limited carbohydrates, that is food grains. To retain the prices, you ban the exports. So what I'm trying to say is that what is there in the name of food security in this country? And then all your vegetables are shooting through the roof. Now, if I'm consuming every day additional 200 to 300 rupees food, then where is the surplus money to buy my cars or cosmetics or other non-essential items? So we have to accept the reality.
Let me take that across to Mithali as well. Mithali, do you think that there is a certain helplessness or cluelessness about how to tackle food inflation over here? Because there is a certain gamification that has happened as well. I mean, the government talked about the tomato grand challenge last year. What do you think is really responsible for this kind of lack of sense of what to do with rising food inflation?
I think, Vikram, we are looking at this issue purely from the lens of demand and supply. We have to now look at the political economy lens as well.
Okay.
At the end of the day, when we are talking about, the agriculture sector as a whole, I'm not going into each commodity, but if we look at it as a whole, one of the major challenges for the sector is over-regulation. You are providing incentives for crop A, B, C, so the farmers are going ahead and going and planting crop A, B, C and not D, which is actually probably suited better for the environment and the climate trends of that area. So there is a real need. I agree with Vijayji that there's a need for a food security plan from a demand side, but there's also a need to look at the climate change impacts. There's a need to look at the climate suitability of different crops, and there's a need to look at the overuse of fertilizers, overuse of okay, we are not allowed to export to this place. There's no market price discovery. So as a result, our markets of agricultural markets are completely and thoroughly just responding to the rules of the game that have been set in place by the center and the state.
Right.
Now, in order to change the rules of the game, the center and state have to agree. They have to discuss, decide, and agree that this is what is the demand-driven approach and this is what will work for that particular area. And that requires a lot of political economy factors to play.
So these conversations, these consultations happen every year before the budget, etc., already for budget 2025. Those discussions have been happening. In fact, after the discussion with the economists today, my colleague had a chance to speak to them to understand what was really discussed. Just let's listen in for a moment what did come up in that meeting that the finance minister has, which is particularly connected with what we are talking about here, these high food prices that we are talking about, and how the government is looking at addressing those issues.
If you look at the entire direct tax collection, it's quite high. So making it a distinction between corporate tax and individual tax or personal tax, there is a scope for reduction of personal tax. That's what one of the economists mentioned that, and it was more look like everybody was agreeing to that.
Generally, I can say that discussions was around increasing investment, controlling the food inflation. Then there was also talk about dealing with the climate change and how we can adopt measures, fiscal measures, to really mitigate the problems with regard to climate change. fiscal consolidation was also the talk of the discussion.
Mithali, doesn't it sound like a lot of what we've already heard in the past? Now it's about finding direction when the finance minister highlights that borrowing costs are becoming stressful for businesses. We're seeing inflation persist. We see no rate cuts in sight. How does all of this affect our economic growth? Because we're talking about Q2 numbers, but yes, projections are coming down. The RBI has brought down projections as well.
Exactly, Vikram. I mean, if we look into the reasons for why the Q2 numbers actually fell, there are two major drivers which actually created this condition. The first is manufacturing sector growth. In Q2 2023, the manufacturing sector growth stood at 14%. Now, in Q2 2024, that has fallen to 2%. Now, one of the reasons for that is, of course, there's been a sluggishness in approvals. There are a lot of proposals actually lying with the government, but because there was elections taking place and a lot of decision making was also stalled, therefore we saw that the approvals were not coming through. Maybe in Q3 we'll start seeing a little bit of an improvement in the manufacturing numbers. The second reason is cyclical. A lot of proposals came in just after the PLI schemes were announced. The market then got saturated in that sense. They had, the ones who wanted to invest came in with the PLI push. But now that sustained increase in manufacturing sector growth has not happened. So it can't just be a PLI which takes your manufacturing growth forward. It has to be an ease of doing business set of environment. It has to be, looking at new export markets and saying that it's not only the domestic market of India for which you're manufacturing here, but also to export from India. So we need a strategy for that.
Right.
And secondly, I'll just complete and say that, the other driver for the reduction in the growth was investment slowdown,
Correct.
private investment slowing down.
No, so if these are the aspects that we're looking at, affordability and consumption levels dropping, how much is that going to play a role in determining our growth path? And that's going to be the key question that, from an economist standpoint, is going to be crucial. We'll have to address the issue of high prices, won't we? And if we don't, what do we risk?
No, absolutely, Vikram, because at the end of the day, if the high prices are not addressed, then even our private consumption, which is currently one of the most important drivers of GDP growth, will start to slow down. And we already know that one of the major problems for our economy is the growing inequality. Gulamji also talked about the fact that at the high income and mid-tier segments, they don't have to worry about their margins, and then nobody is serving the low tier segments. I mean, we can't have an economy like that, because then we don't have a depth in our consumption. So what we actually need is policies around progressive taxation, policies around income redistribution, thinking about, how can that growth percolate down to the middle class and the lower middle class, and also providing a cushion through social protection for the low income and the extreme low income. So therefore, that's the only way to kind of push this forward. And the extreme low income persons are often farmers.
Yes,
So
indeed.
then deregulation, looking at how can we, bring in crop diversification, looking at linking farmers to export markets. These are mechanisms through which we can restart that agricultural process.
Well, until that happens, of course, there are these fiscal and monetary constraints that we are tackling. But Ghulam, do you think that real estate demand, it's affecting a lot of other sectors? I'm talking to you about real estate because that's a sector that you are representing. Do you think that sectors are being indirectly stifled by policy inaction on inflation?
I would agree. I would tend to agree to that, because as I said, my concern is that whenever we say that the luxury segments actually are outperforming, but then there will be a limit to it, because somewhere we are going to see this entire luxury demand coming to an end. And that is where the mid to lower end has to come to the rescue of the industry. And that's exactly what I said. The period prior to COVID, almost about 2/3 was actually mid to lower end. In fact, here also something else to be kept in mind is that when we are doing housing for all, as the mantra from the Pradhan Mantri, we also have to focus on this exact aspect, that why is the lower end not performing well? Purely because the supply side constraint. The developers are not coming forward to produce. I guess that's exactly what even the other economists are talking about. If the farmers are not contributing, how will you see this entire thing turning around? The same case over here. If the developers are not creating enough inventory for the lower end of the market, the economy will suffer in times to come. And it is high time we should look at rate cuts, to bring the lower end of the market back, so that even housing, I'm just talking about real estate now, for real estate to survive and sustain in the long term, mid to low end has to get back in action.
Ghulam, in your career where you may have seen prolonged inflation in times in the past, especially when it comes to essentials, how much have you seen that affect urban and semi-urban housing demand?
Well, typically, we talk about real estate cycles, and a typical cycle is almost about 10 years. And when we have seen this, the bottoming out of the previous cycle, that was barely about 2.5 to 3 years back. So I feel that to reach that 12 o'clock position on the property clock, you still have a year and a half to go.
Right.
And that is my concern. If
Yes.
the property price rise, if the growing transactions, all of that are taken as a signal that the sector is doing well, somewhere I'm worried that, that 12 o'clock position, whenever it comes, the crash will be a mighty one. And that's my concern.
That should be a concern. VijaySardana, would you agree? Ghulam highlighting how inflation affects broader economic activity, including real estate. But from your perspective, what is the root cause still? Is it the inefficiency in managing agricultural inputs and outputs? You said there is a need to understand demand and where it stands and security, how much of food security we've been able to achieve. But beyond that, in the here and now, what needs to be done?
Vikram, life is not as complicated as you try to project. Life operates on a common sense basis. Don't apply too much brain. Except it's very simple. If you do not have productivity per acre, what will happen? Your cost of production will go up. Then farmers will demand more MSP. When you give more MSP, then will market absorb or not? And that is what I'm trying to say. Minute you continue to increase MSP, I will prefer to import. Why I should buy from Indian farmer? Be logical in life. Today you are talking about make in India and everything. China is giving me cheaper. Why I should make in India?
Yes.
Somebody was mentioning about logistics problem. Are you getting ice cream in every nook and corner of India or not? Where is the problem of logistics? Problem is because wherever that makes sense, market operates. Where it is not making sense, why I should spend in potato or onion or in any case of cold storages?
Yes.
Because government comes and starts putting the stock limits. So point here is very simple. I know how to operate as a businessman. Don't tell me as a policy maker how to do business. I am saying do your job properly. You are talking about make in India. Go and read the document of make in China. It is far superior with specific targets. This month we will achieve this and that month. Where is the target in make in India? Point here comes up is we talk a lot. Execution is zero. We make an announcement. We hope that somebody will come, buy this buy story, start investing in India. Our laws are same. Corruption has gone up. Corrupt bribe rates have gone up. Inspectors' harassment has gone up. Small scale industry prefer to import and sell. Why should manufacture in India do the bribing to the inspectors? Makes difficult very life. Farmers are not interested. Out of 60,000 varieties which we have launched in the last 70 years, show me 10 varieties which are world class, where I can say India has the highest productivity in these 10 crops. Show me one crop. So what we
Well,
are
it's
trying
certainly
to
not
do
true
is
as far
we
as
are not
tomatoes
talking
and
fundamentals.
yes, it's certainly not true where tomatoes, onions and potatoes go, the cost of which has been rising and pinching every pocket. Whether it's the cost of flawed policy making, and perhaps that could hurt us even more, like Ghulam Zia is hinting, the government and the RBI seem to be walking a rather tight rope. But are they pulling in opposite directions over here? And Mithali has a strong view on this as well. This requires a deeper thought process for sure. But that's where we're leaving it tonight. Vijay, Mithali, Ghulam, thank you for joining us tonight. The inflation numbers may be fluctuating. The burden on the common man often does not. It's time that we ask these right questions and demand better answers. Thanks for starting that process with us here on ET Now.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.